I'm Chloe Hartman, 36 years old, and for most of my life, I was the overlooked daughter. While my sister racked up Ivy League degrees, a high-powered law career, and a picture-perfect family, I ran a modest antique shop in Savannah. To them, I was quaint, forgettable, the girl who played store. Every Thanksgiving, I smiled through the condescension, until last year, when a single text message changed everything. My sister picked up my phone and saw it. A message from my financial advisor congratulating me on quietly crossing $15 million in net worth. That's when the masks fell. And for the first time, I saw what my family really thought of me and what they believed they were entitled to. Before I share the full story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most. This might be the story you didn't know you needed. I grew up in the picturesque suburbs of Savannah, Georgia. Think manicured lawns, big colonial-style houses, and every family Christmas card looking like a spread from a home decor magazine. My parents, Arthur and Sarah, were all about appearances. Dad was a bank manager, Mom a high school administrator. Their world revolved around prestigious degrees, conventional careers, and achievements you could casually drop into conversation at the country club. And then there was Valerie, my sister, 3 years my senior. From the moment she brought home her first straight-A report card, she became the standard, the golden girl. Valerie checked every single box on my parents' success checklist. Valedictorian? Check. Ivy League law degree from Yale? Check. Marriage to Brandon, a hotshot dermatologist with his own thriving practice? Double check. And 2 kids, Emily and Leo, who looked like they'd stepped out of a private school brochure, always impeccably dressed and perfectly behaved. Their family photos were the kind you saw in Ralph Lauren ads, not just Christmas cards. Your sister made partner at 32, my mom would remind me during our monthly calls, always adding the kicker, the youngest female partner in her firm's history. That fact was repeated so often, it might as well have been engraved on our family crest. Me, my interests diverged early. While Valerie was dominating debate club and student government, I was losing myself for hours in the small, musty Savannah Historical Society. I was captivated by everything: the faded maps, the antique furniture, the handwritten letters from the colonial era. I'd trace my fingers over the glass cases, imagining the stories behind each button, each piece of fabric. The elderly curator there, Ms. Eleanor Vance, she noticed my fascination. She took me under her wing, patiently teaching me about preservation, provenance, and the hidden language of antiques. "You have the eye, Chloe," she'd tell me, her voice raspy with age and wisdom. "Some people can look at an old chair and just see wood. You see the hands that crafted it, the people who sat in it, the history it witnessed." When I announced my intention to study art history in college, my father's disappointment was palpable. He didn't even look up from his financial newspaper. "What exactly do you plan to do with that degree?" he asked, his voice flat. "Museums pay nothing, you know." I admitted I wasn't sure yet, but it was what I loved. His reply was immediate, cutting. "Love doesn't pay the mortgage." Conversation over. I chose a state university with a solid art history program, a decision that prompted frequent, pointed comparisons to Valerie's Ivy League pedigree during family dinners. My parents would steer conversations toward Valerie's law school accomplishments, while my summer internship at the Telfair Museums was mentioned only in passing, if at all. After graduation, I worked at a regional auction house in Charleston for 3 years. I absorbed everything I could about valuation, authentication, and the intricate dance of the art market. My supervisors noted my unusual ability to spot overlooked treasures, a knack, a gut feeling, a deep-seated knowledge that others just didn't have. But my salary, it remained modest, barely enough to cover rent in my tiny Charleston apartment. When I announced my plan to open an antique shop at 25, my family's reaction was predictably dismissive. "Playing store," my mother called it, as if I were a child setting up a lemonade stand on the side of the road. "It's a tough business, Chloe," my father warned, his tone grave. "Most small retailers fail within the first year." Valerie was blunter, cutting straight to the bone. "You're wasting your education on a hobby. No one gets rich selling other people's junk." I found a small storefront in Savannah's historic Factors Walk area, a narrow brick building with uneven cobblestone floors and exposed beams that just felt right. The rent stretched my savings thin, but something about the space whispered to me, promising stories. I named it Timeless Relics and spent weeks refinishing the interior myself, installing antique display cases I'd rescued from a closing department store and carefully cataloging my initial inventory. The shop opened with little fanfare. My parents attended, but spent most of the evening talking to Valerie and Brandon about their recent vacation to the Greek islands. I overheard my mother apologizing to a family friend. "It's just a phase, you know. She'll find her real career eventually." For 8 years, that perception persisted. At every family gathering, my profession was treated as a temporary diversion, something to be tolerated until I found a real job. The questions became predictable, a well-worn script. "Is that little shop still keeping the lights on, Chloe?" my father would ask, not quite meeting my eye. "Have you thought about getting your teaching certificate as a backup?" my mother would suggest, stirring her tea. "Don't you get bored sitting there all day waiting for customers?" Valerie would chime in, a smirk playing on her lips. What they didn't understand, what I never explained, was that I had found my calling. Each piece that passed through my shop had a story, a lineage, a soul. I could look at a tarnished silver teapot and recognize its Georgian craftsmanship, or identify a Savannah-made Chippendale chair from subtle details in its carvings. This knowledge wasn't just academic. It had practical value that my family, blinded by their own conventional metrics of success, simply couldn't see. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter followed the same script. Valerie would hold court in the living room, detailing her latest legal triumph or her children's achievements. I would help in the kitchen, assigned to peeling potatoes or setting the table, occasionally asked perfunctory questions about the shop, but never given space to truly answer. "We worry about your retirement, Chloe," my mother would say, stirring cranberry sauce. "Valerie's firm has an excellent 401k match, you know." These gatherings left me emotionally drained, driving back to my small apartment above the shop with a hollow feeling in my chest. In my sanctuary, surrounded by the treasures I'd kept for my personal collection, I'd allow myself to acknowledge the hurt. But by morning, I'd push it aside and return to work, to the world where my knowledge was respected and my passion understood. What my family never knew was that beneath their dismissal, I was building something extraordinary, something that would eventually shatter their perception of me in a single Thanksgiving moment. The first time I realized I could turn my knowledge into serious money happened almost by accident. It was 3 years after opening my shop. I was browsing a weekend estate sale in a wealthy part of Atlanta, fighting the chilly drizzle and the early morning crowds. The house belonged to a recently deceased professor, and most of the truly valuable items had already been claimed by family members. What remained was being liquidated by a company that specialized in quick turnover rather than careful assessment. In the dusty basement, leaning against an old water heater, I spotted a small darkened oil painting in a tarnished frame. The liquidator had marked it at $50, assuming it was a worthless reproduction, but something about the brushwork caught my eye. The confident, almost defiant strokes, the luminous quality of the light emanating from the canvas. It was a feeling I couldn't ignore. I bought it without haggling, along with some vintage books and old pottery, just to avoid drawing any attention to my interest in the painting. I didn't want anyone to realize I'd found something. Back at my shop, I spent days late into the night, carefully cleaning the painting. Removing decades of grime was like peeling back layers of time. As the true colors emerged, my suspicion grew. Then came the research. Hours in libraries, cross-referencing artists' signatures, comparing brushstrokes to known works, delving into obscure art historical texts. Finally, I confirmed it. It was an early work by a significant 19th century American landscape artist, someone whose later pieces commanded high prices but whose early work was often overlooked, especially when unsigned. Its worth? Approximately $120,000. I sold it through a small, reputable auction house in New York for $145,000, minus their commission. This was my first significant windfall, and it wasn't my last. That experience opened my eyes. I developed a system. I started regularly visiting estate sales in wealthy New England towns, places like Newport, Rhode Island, or the sprawling old money estates outside Boston. I built relationships with house clearance specialists, the people who were called in to empty properties quickly after a death or relocation. I even traveled occasionally to rural auctions in the Deep South, places where sophisticated buyers were scarce, and hidden gems could slip through unnoticed. I learned to look for items with specific characteristics that suggested hidden value, a quality that transcended fleeting fashion trends, historical significance overlooked by generalist appraisers, or works by artists on the cusp of rediscovery. My eye wasn't just for beauty, it was for potential. One rainy Tuesday, an elderly man brought a cardboard box into my shop. He'd found it while clearing his aunt's attic. It was filled with musty recipes, faded family photographs, and yellowed letters. He just wanted to get rid of it. Among them, almost as an afterthought, was a folded, brittle document with a barely legible signature. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized it immediately. A Revolutionary War-era letter, written by a significant historical figure, someone whose correspondence was extremely rare and highly sought after. I paid him $75 for the entire box, maintaining my poker face, though inside I was buzzing. 6 months later, after painstaking authentication and careful restoration, that document sold to a private collector for $600,000. These weren't everyday occurrences, of course, but they happened often enough. A Tiffany lamp, its glass coated in years of dust, purchased for $200 at a church rummage sale in Savannah, later sold for $25,000. A collection of early photography, acquired for $350 from a retiring collector, was worth over $40,000 to the Georgia History Museum. A seemingly ordinary antique desk from a university surplus sale, bought for a few $100s, contained a hidden compartment with Civil War-era gold coins worth a small fortune. I became strategic about my success. In the small world of antique dealers in the Southeast, I maintained a reputation as a knowledgeable but modest shop owner. I sold my most valuable discoveries through larger auction houses in New York or through private dealers, always keeping my name off the provenance records. The money went into investment accounts, managed by a discreet financial advisor, Mr. Julian Thorne, who specialized in helping entrepreneurs like me maintain low profiles. He understood the unique nature of my business and my desire for privacy. My lifestyle remained unchanged. I drove the same reliable Subaru I'd had since college. My wardrobe consisted primarily of quality basics, comfortable jeans, well-made sweaters from consignment shops, and sturdy boots. I took simple pleasures in good coffee, interesting books, and occasional dinners at neighborhood restaurants where I knew the owners by name. My most significant indulgence was traveling to Europe once a year, ostensibly for buying trips, but really to visit museums and historical sites that fed my insatiable passion for history. It was my quiet rebellion, my true luxury. The only substantial change in my circumstances came 5 years ago. The owner of my building in Factors Walk decided to sell. Fearing displacement, losing the space that had become my sanctuary, my identity, I used some of my capital to purchase not just my storefront, but the entire historic building. I did it through an LLC, a legal structure that couldn't be easily traced back to me. The 4-story brick structure gave me security, and eventually additional income from the other commercial and residential units. It was a tangible asset, a symbol of my silent success. By the time of last year's Thanksgiving, my net worth had quietly grown to just over $15 million. The bulk was in diversified investments, with smaller portions in real estate, rare books, and a carefully curated personal collection of antiques, pieces too special, too meaningful to ever sell. Mr. Thorne had recently congratulated me on reaching this milestone with a simple text message. That very message, that innocent professional notification, would ultimately expose my secret. I had specific reasons for keeping my wealth private. Initially, it was simple business sense. In the antiquing world, showing too much prosperity can make sellers raise their prices or attract competitors to your unique sources. But as time passed, my silence became more personal. Each dismissive comment from my family, each patronizing question, had built a wall between us. Each time they minimized my career as cute or quaint, I added another brick to that wall. Their perception of me as the underachieving daughter had calcified, hardened into something impenetrable, and in some perverse way, I'd grown attached to it. As the unsuccessful sister, at least I was free from expectations. No one asked me for financial advice or loans. No one expected me to fund family vacations or children's college funds. More importantly, the few relationships I maintained outside my family were genuine. My small circle of friends, other shop owners in the historic district, a couple of museum curators, my upstairs tenant who taught art at a community college, they liked me for myself, for my knowledge, for my quiet passion, not for my bank account. In a world where I'd learned to spot fakes and forgeries with startling accuracy, these authentic connections were priceless. I'd occasionally considered revealing the truth, especially after particularly condescending family gatherings. But something always held me back, a fear that money would transform me from a disappointing daughter to a family bank, a fear that any subsequent warmth from them would be tainted by financial interest, a hungry gleam in their eyes. So I maintained my modest facade. I showed up to family events with simple, thoughtful gifts, usually a rare, beautiful book I'd found, hoping to share a piece of my world. I shared quiet stories about interesting items that had passed through my shop. I listened to Valerie's monologues about her firm's high-profile cases and Emily and Leo's private school achievements. I helped my mother in the kitchen and discussed baseball with my father. I played my assigned role in the family drama, until last Thanksgiving, when everything changed. I woke before dawn on Thanksgiving Day, anxiety already churning in my stomach. The weather matched my mood, gray and threatening, with a sharp wind that scattered the last brittle leaves across the cobblestones of Factor's Walk. I'd baked cranberry bread the night before, a family tradition, and carefully wrapped 3 vintage books I'd found for my niece and nephew, Emily and Leo. I knew they'd probably prefer electronic gifts, but I always hoped to share a bit of my world with them, a tangible connection to stories and history. The drive to my parents' suburban home in Isle of Hope took longer than usual due to holiday traffic. Valerie's gleaming black Mercedes SUV already occupied the prime spot in the driveway when I arrived, forcing me to park on the street, a familiar little symbol of our unspoken hierarchy. Through the bay window, I could see my mother laughing at something Valerie was saying, her hand resting affectionately on my sister's shoulder. I sat in my car for an extra moment, rehearsing the mental script I'd developed over years of family gatherings. Smile politely, deflect personal questions, show interest in others, escape as soon as socially acceptable. With the cranberry bread and gifts balanced precariously in my arms, I made my way to the front door. "There she is," my mother, Sarah, exclaimed as I entered, her voice carrying that slightly too enthusiastic tone she used when she was trying to be encouraging. "Valerie just got here too. Perfect timing." My sister looked up from her phone, her smile professional and practiced. At 36, Valerie maintained the polished appearance of a woman featured in business magazines. Sleek bob, subtle makeup, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills. "The shop girl arrives," she said, using the nickname she knew I disliked, a little barb disguised as banter. "How's retail treating you during the holiday rush? Getting lots of customers looking for dusty treasures?" "Steady," I replied, the standard answer that neither invited further questions nor gave any real information. "How are the kids?" This predictably launched Valerie into a detailed account of Emily's violin recital and Leo's soccer championship. I nodded at appropriate intervals while helping my mother in the kitchen, where she immediately assigned me to vegetable prep while she worked on more complex dishes. My father, Arthur, entered, already holding his traditional pre-dinner scotch. "There's my girls," he said, kissing Valerie on the cheek before giving me an awkward side hug. "How's business, Chloe? Still keeping afloat?" "I'm doing fine, Dad," I said, focusing on perfectly dicing celery for the stuffing, my knife a rhythmic, comforting sound. That's good," he replied absently. "Did Valerie tell you about the Lockhart case? Made the front page of the Savannah Business Review." And so it went, the familiar choreography of our family dynamic. Valerie's husband, Brandon, arrived with the children, who politely thanked me for the books before setting them aside in favor of their tablets. My brother-in-law immediately launched into a story about a celebrity client at his dermatology practice, careful to mention the caliber of the restaurants where they'd subsequently had lunch. Around 3 a.m., as food preparation reached its critical stage, Valerie's constant phone notifications became a source of irritation for my mother. "Valerie, please put that thing away or silence it," she said, exasperated, after a particularly loud ping interrupted her gravy instructions. "Sorry, Mom, but I'm waiting for an important email about the upcoming merger," Valerie replied, barely glancing up. "Battery's almost dead anyway. Hey, Chloe, can I borrow your phone? Mine's about to die, and I need to check my email." Before I could object, she'd spotted my phone on the counter, where I'd placed it while washing cranberries. Valerie picked it up, and I thought nothing of it, until I remembered the text notification that had arrived that morning from Mr. Thorne, my financial advisor, still unread on my lock screen. Time seemed to slow. I watched Valerie's expression transform from casual interest to confusion, then widening shock as she read. Her eyes darted from the screen to me, back to the screen. The text read, "Congratulations on surpassing the $15 million mark this quarter. Your diversification strategy is paying off nicely. Let's discuss next steps for the property acquisition when you're back from the holiday." What the hell is this? Valerie's voice cut through the kitchen noise, sharp, disbelieving. She turned the phone toward me, her hand shaking slightly. $15 million, is this some kind of joke? My mother stopped stirring the gravy, her spoon suspended midair. My father lowered his scotch glass, his eyes fixed on us. The kitchen fell silent, except for the cheerful beeping of the oven timer, suddenly absurd in the tension. "Valerie, give me my phone," I said quietly, reaching for it. She pulled it back, holding it like a shield. "No, I want to know what this means. Are you in some kind of trouble? Money laundering? Because if you're involved in something illegal, I need to know before it affects my reputation at the firm." The immediate assumption that any wealth I possessed must be illegitimate stung more than I expected. "It's not illegal," I said, feeling a strange calm descend. "It's mine. I earned it. Now please give me back my phone." My father stepped forward. "What's going on, Chloe? What is Valerie talking about?" Valerie thrust the phone toward him. "Apparently, your struggling shop girl is sitting on $15 million. She never bothered to mention it to any of us." My father's eyes widened as he read the message, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. A disconcerting mixture of shock, confusion, and something that looked unsettlingly like calculation. "Is this true?" he asked. The moment I'd unconsciously feared for years had arrived. My carefully constructed separation between family and finances had collapsed in an instant. I took a deep breath, the scent of roasting turkey and tension filling the air. "Yes, it's true," I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. "I've been successful in my business, more successful than I've let on." "Successful?" Valerie laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that grated on my ears. "That's like calling the ocean a bit wet. $15 million while you've been showing up here in thrift store clothes, letting us think you were barely scraping by? That's not success, Chloe. That's deception." "I never said I was struggling," I countered, feeling defensive, a heat rising in my cheeks. "You all assumed that." My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke, her voice strained. "Dinner's ready, everyone. To the table. We can discuss this while we eat." It was such a typically maternal response. No matter the crisis, meals must proceed on schedule, that I almost laughed. But the gravity in her voice suggested this wasn't an attempt to change the subject, merely to relocate the confrontation. We moved to the dining room in silence. The elaborate Thanksgiving spread, a masterpiece of culinary effort, suddenly seemed insignificant, a mere backdrop to the unfolding drama. As we took our seats, I noticed Brandon whispering to Valerie, his expression intense, a calculating glint in his eye. Emily and Leo, sensing the palpable tension, became unusually quiet, their eyes darting between the adults, their small faces mirroring our discomfort. My father cleared his throat after a painfully silent prayer that felt more like a plea for mercy. "I think we deserve an explanation, Chloe." And so, as the turkey grew cold and the gravy congealed, I gave them the abbreviated version. I spoke of my eye for undervalued items, the significant finds, the strategic investments, the years of quiet, meticulous work. I explained how I'd built my fortune piece by piece, find by find, investment by investment. I even mentioned the Revolutionary War letter and the early American painting, trying to convey the intellectual thrill of discovery, the culmination of years of dismissed knowledge. Instead of the grudging respect I might have hoped for, each revelation seemed to fuel their indignation. Valerie's face flushed a deeper red with every detail, her jaw tight. My parents exchanged glances, loaded with unspoken communication, a mix of shock, betrayal, and something else. Something that looked suspiciously like opportunity. Brandon kept taking out his phone, typing figures into a calculator app, his brow furrowed in concentration. "So all these years," Valerie finally interrupted, her voice thick with righteous indignation, While we've been worried about you, feeling sorry for you with your little shop, you've been secretly a millionaire, laughing at us behind our backs? I wasn't laughing at anyone, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to remain calm. I just kept my business to myself. Family doesn't keep secrets like this, my mother said, her voice trembling, her eyes fixed on me with a wounded expression. Family shares their blessings, like you've shared in my interests all these years. The words escaped before I could stop them, years of unspoken resentment bubbling to the surface. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject to Valerie's latest achievement, or you called it a hobby. That's not fair, my father interjected, his voice stern, trying to regain control of the crumbling facade. We were concerned about your future. If we'd known you were doing well, you would have what? I asked, suddenly feeling a surge of defiant energy. Been interested in antiques? Stopped calling it playing store? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, thick and suffocating. Emily asked if he could be excused to watch television, and Valerie nodded absently, her eyes never leaving my face. I think, she said finally, her lawyer voice emerging, crisp and commanding, that we need to have a serious family discussion about this. In the living room, now. As we abandoned the Thanksgiving feast my mother had spent days preparing, I knew we were heading into a conversation that would permanently alter our family dynamic. What I didn't yet realize was just how nakedly it would reveal what my family really thought of me and what they believed they were entitled to. The transition from dining room to living room felt like walking from one courtroom to another. Valerie led the procession, her back rigid with indignation. My parents followed, exchanging whispers I couldn't quite catch. Brandon chose the armchair nearest my sister, leaving me the seat furthest from the group, isolated and exposed. The physical arrangement wasn't subtle. It was 4 against 1. I think we need complete transparency now, Chloe, Valerie began, her professional tone barely masking her simmering emotion. Exactly how much money are we talking about? And in what forms? The presumptuous "we" wasn't lost on me. It felt like an interrogation. I don't see how the specifics are relevant, I replied, my voice calm, but with an underlying steel. It's my personal financial information. It became relevant the moment we discovered you've been hiding millions while watching the rest of us struggle, Valerie shot back, her voice rising. Struggle? I couldn't help but laugh, a short, disbelieving bark. Valerie, you make over $300,000 a year. Brandon's practice brings in more than that. You vacation in the Maldives and drive a car that costs more than some houses in Savannah. We have expenses you can't imagine, Chloe, Brandon interjected, leaning forward, his eyes bright with self-pity and entitlement. Private school tuition for 2 children is over $60,000 annually. The country club membership is another $40,000. The vacation property in Vermont. Valerie's student loans are still over $100,000 despite a decade of payments. He listed them like a litany of unbearable burdens. Those are choices, Brandon, not struggles, I pointed out, my voice flat, cutting through his self-serving narrative. My mother leaned forward, her expression pained, as if she were witnessing an open wound. Chloe, please, this hostile attitude isn't helping. We're just trying to understand why you kept such a significant secret from people who love you. Her words might have moved me if my father hadn't immediately followed with a muttered, $15 million. Good God. And here we've been concerned about your retirement planning. All those conversations about whether you should get a real job with benefits. My job is real, Ted, I said firmly, my gaze sweeping across their faces. It's always been real. The fact that you never respected it doesn't change that. That's unfair, my mother protested weakly. We just worried. Valerie had been uncharacteristically quiet for a moment, seemingly lost in calculation. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed to the trembling, emotional tone I recognized from her courtroom performances, a blend of vulnerability and strategic manipulation. Do you have any idea what that kind of money would mean for Emily and Leo? Tears welled in her eyes, strategically, perfectly. Emily's showing real promise with violin. She could study abroad, attend Juilliard, and Leo might need special tutoring for his dyslexia. The good programs cost a fortune. I blinked, surprised. I didn't know Leo had dyslexia. We just got the diagnosis, Valerie continued, seizing on my moment of sympathy, doubling down on the performance. The specialists, the programs, insurance barely covers any of it. Meanwhile, you're sitting on a fortune that you, as a single woman with no children, can't possibly need all for yourself. And there it was in the first direct, unmistakable suggestion that my money should be redistributed according to their perception of need. Brandon nodded eagerly, his eyes shining. Even a small portion, say $5 million invested properly, could secure the children's future and help with Valerie's student debt. You'd still have $10 million left, more than enough for one person. The casual way he proposed dividing my life's work, my passion, my years of sacrifice, as if cutting a pie at dinner, left me momentarily speechless. My father cleared his throat. Now let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Chloe, you have to understand our shock. All these years, your mother and I worried about you. We even set aside a fund to help you if your shop failed. Not much, just $20,000 we could spare. We sacrificed to put you through college, hoping you'd find a stable career. I paid back every cent of my college expenses, I reminded him, my voice clipped. 3 years after graduation, I sent checks monthly until it was cleared. That's not the point, my mother interjected, her voice sharp with exasperation. Family supports each other. If one has abundance, they share with those in need. And I'm supposed to believe Valerie is in need? I asked incredulously, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Valerie's eyes narrowed. It's not about being destitute, it's about family obligation. If our positions were reversed, I would help you without hesitation. I doubted this deeply, profoundly, but kept the thought to myself. The children's education alone, Brandon continued, as if I hadn't spoken, oblivious to the raw emotion in the room. Harvard undergraduate is projected to cost nearly $500,000 per child by the time they're ready. Then graduate school. The real issue, Valerie said, wiping away a strategic tear, her voice brimming with manufactured emotion, is that you've been deceiving us while accumulating wealth that could benefit the entire family. If you really loved us, you would want to share your good fortune. The emotional manipulation was so transparent, so calculated, I almost admired its boldness. Almost. I earned every dollar through knowledge and work you all dismissed for years, I said quietly, the words weighted with decades of unacknowledged effort. Now suddenly my career is valid because it produced money? Don't be dramatic, Chloe, Valerie snapped, dropping the pretense of tears. No one is asking for all of it. Just a reasonable portion to help family. That's what normal people do. Normal people don't demand others' money simply because they've discovered it exists, I countered, my own calm breaking. My father, always the pragmatist, tried a different approach, appealing to a sense of legacy. Think of it as an investment in your niece and nephew, family legacy. Your money would be going to the next generation, not just disappearing. For the next hour, the conversation circled these themes: family obligation, the children's needs, and increasingly specific suggestions for how my money should be allocated. Valerie mentioned a potential investment opportunity through a law firm client. Guaranteed 20% returns, but the buy-in is $2 million minimum. My father suggested I purchase a vacation property the whole family could use, a sprawling house on the coast. Brandon wondered aloud if I might provide the down payment for a larger house they'd been considering, lamenting how tight things were with their significant expenses. With each suggestion, the pretense of family concern grew thinner, revealing the naked entitlement beneath. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do with my own money. Not once did anyone acknowledge that perhaps I had earned the right to decide its allocation. The breaking point came when Valerie, frustrated by my continued resistance, finally showed her hand completely, no longer bothering with pretense or tears. You don't even need it, Chloe, she snapped, her voice cold, venomous. Look at how you live. That tiny apartment above your shop, those second-hand clothes, that car you've had forever. You live like a pauper anyway. The money is wasted on you. The room fell silent. Even my parents seemed taken aback by the naked cruelty of the statement. The truth of it, delivered with such contempt, landed like a punch to the gut. I think I said, rising from my chair, my muscles stiff with accumulated tension. I think this conversation is over. Sit down, Chloe, Valerie demanded, her eyes flashing. We're not finished. Actually, we are, I said, moving toward the door, my resolve hardening with every step. If you walk out now, Valerie called after me, her voice cutting through the air. Don't expect things to be the same. Family works both ways, Chloe. You can't just take and never give back. I turned at the doorway, my hand on the cool metal knob. What exactly have I taken from you, Valerie? She faltered for a moment, her carefully constructed outrage briefly dissolving into confusion before recovering. Years of concern, worry, emotional support. Interesting, I replied, a bitter smile touching my lips. I must have missed all that support between the condescension and dismissal. My mother stood, distress evident on her face, wringing her hands. Please, girls, it's Thanksgiving. Let's not say things we'll regret. But it was too late for that. Years of unspoken resentment, of quiet pain, had broken through the surface, raw and exposed. And there would be no returning to polite pretense. I need you to make a decision right now, Chloe, Valerie said, her voice cold, hard as granite. Either you help your family the way family should, or you're choosing money over blood. It's that simple. It wasn't simple. Nothing about family ever is. But in that moment, facing 4 people who had suddenly revealed how they truly saw me, not as a person, but as a resource to be tapped, a hidden piggy bank to be raided, the path forward clarified with painful brightness. Goodbye, I said simply, my voice unwavering. Happy Thanksgiving. As I walked out into the cold November evening, the sound of Valerie's angry protests faded behind me. In my Subaru, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel, I realized I was simultaneously devastated and relieved, like someone who has finally put down an impossibly heavy burden they'd been carrying for years. The 20-minute drive back to Savannah became a journey through both space and memory. Rain began to spatter against my windshield. Each swipe of the wipers seemed to clear away not just water, but years of accumulated pretense. Traffic crawled along the highway, giving me unwanted time to replay the afternoon's events and the decades of family dynamics that had led to this moment. I remembered my 8th grade art history presentation, how excited I'd been to share my passion with my family, the careful research I'd done on Vermeer, the handmade visual aids I'd created. My parents had attended only because the event coincided with Valerie's debate team finals in the same school. They'd sat through my presentation with polite disinterest, checking their watches repeatedly, then erupted in genuine enthusiasm when Valerie won her competition. That's our girl, my father had cheered, while I stood nearby, holding my excellent certificate that no one asked to see. I recalled my college graduation, where my parents had spent most of the celebration dinner discussing Valerie's law school acceptance. My accomplishments were relegated to brief acknowledgments between more important conversations. The pattern continued through the opening of my shop, my 30th birthday, every holiday and family gathering. A consistent, unspoken message that my path was less valuable, my achievements less significant, my personhood somehow secondary. By the time I reached Savannah, the rain had intensified into a deluge that matched my emotional state. Instead of turning toward my shop in Factor's Walk, I found myself driving to Tybee Island Beach, the wild, windswept coast just a short drive away. The parking lot was deserted. No one else was foolish enough to visit the shore in a November downpour. I sat in my car, watching waves crash against the empty beach, rain drumming on the roof, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Tears came, not gentle or cleansing, but wrenching sobs that left me gasping for air. I cried for the family I had wished for all these years, for the conditional love that had been exposed that night, and for the final shattering of the illusion that things might someday change. An hour passed before the storm, both outside and within me, began to subside. As my breathing steadied, a strange calm descended. I had spent my life seeking approval from people fundamentally incapable of giving it. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I drove to my shop in Factor's Walk, climbing the narrow stairs to my apartment above. The space had always been my sanctuary. Walls lined with bookshelves holding my most treasured volumes, windows overlooking the historic street below, and carefully chosen pieces from my personal collection displayed in thoughtful arrangements. My parents had visited exactly once, 8 years ago, commenting primarily on the lack of square footage and outdated kitchen appliances. That night, I slept fitfully, waking several times to check my phone. There were multiple missed calls and increasingly angry texts from Valerie, a barrage of accusations, demands, and threats. one confused, heartbroken message from my mother, and silence from my father. I turned the phone off completely and stared at the ceiling, watching shadows from street lamps create patterns in the darkness. By morning, a decision had crystallized. I showered, dressed in one of my second-hand outfits, actually a beautifully tailored vintage Chanel suit that had cost more than Valerie's monthly car payment, and prepared to open my shop as usual. Black Friday was typically busy with tourists exploring the historic district after Thanksgiving celebrations. Just before unlocking the door, my phone chimed with a final text from Valerie. It was more subdued than the others, but still insistent. "We need to finish our conversation. Brandon and I have an investment opportunity that won't wait. 2 million minimum buy-in, call immediately." Something inside me snapped, not in breakdown, but in breakthrough. I called Valerie back immediately, surprising her enough that she answered on the first ring. "Finally," she began, her voice already shifting into her firm client tone. "About the investment." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady, clear. "I'm not calling about your investment opportunity. I'm calling to say this clearly, once and for all. Chloe, my entire life," I continued, a lifetime of unspoken thoughts finally finding voice. "I have watched you receive validation, support, and recognition, while my choices were dismissed and my accomplishments ignored. When you thought I was struggling, you offered nothing but condescension. Now that you know I'm not, you offer nothing but entitlement." Silence on the other end, a stunned, shocked silence. "That's not fair," Valerie finally managed, her voice weak. "Let me finish," I pressed on, gaining strength with every word. "Every dollar I have came from knowledge you mocked, work you belittled, and passion you dismissed. I identified Revolutionary War documents while you called my shop a cute hobby. I authenticated 19th century masterpieces while you asked when I would get a real job. I built a multi-million-dollar business while you treated me like a charity case." More silence, the kind where you could hear the blood rushing in your ears. "The money you're so eager to claim represents thousands of hours of research, risk, and expertise. It represents every dismissive comment I've endured, every holiday I've been sidelined, every accomplishment that went unacknowledged. And now you believe you deserve it because we share DNA? Family helps family, Tab." She finally managed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Family respects family," I countered. "Family supports dreams, celebrates successes, and loves unconditionally. You have done none of these things. So you're choosing money over us, over your niece and nephew?" The desperation was clear now, the last-ditch attempt at guilt-tripping. "I'm choosing myself, finally," I replied, my voice softening just slightly. "Emily and Leo are welcome in my life and my shop anytime. They always have been, though you've brought them exactly twice in 8 years. As for the money, not a penny goes to people who only valued me once they discovered my bank balance." "You'll regret this," Valerie said, her voice cold, the defeat turning into a chilling threat. "When Mom and Dad are older and need care, when the kids graduate and you're not welcome, when you're alone with nothing but your precious money and dusty antiques. I'd rather be alone with authenticity than surrounded by conditional love," I replied. "Goodbye, Valerie." I ended the call and turned my phone off completely. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Then I unlocked my shop door, turned the sign to open, and welcomed the first customer of the day with a genuine smile that felt like my first honest expression in years. Behind the counter, I opened my leather-bound inventory book and began a new page. At the top, I wrote a title, "After Thanksgiving." Below it, I started cataloging what I had lost and what I had gained in the past 24 hours. The losses were significant, painful, but expected. The gains, self-respect, clarity, freedom from pretense, were only beginning to reveal their true, immeasurable value. The weeks following Thanksgiving unfolded like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Initial shock giving way to assessment of damage, followed by the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. December arrived with its customary Savannah chill, holiday decorations appearing throughout the historic district like colorful defiance against winter's advance. I maintained radio silence with my family, though their presence intruded in digital form. Valerie had taken to posting cryptic social media updates, clearly intended for my consumption. Some people confuse self-centeredness with independence, and family is about giving, not taking. My mother sent occasional text messages that walked a careful line between guilt-inducing and conciliatory. "We miss you, and this isn't what family should be. And the children are asking about you." My father's silence spoke volumes, a heavier weight than any words. The only surprising communication came from my cousin Brooke, my mother's niece, who lived in Seattle and rarely participated in family gatherings. Her message was simple, direct. "Heard about Thanksgiving, been on the receiving end of Valerie's entitlement myself. If you need an ally, I'm here." We'd never been particularly close, but her unexpected support arrived like a lifeline when I most needed one. It was a reminder that genuine connection could surface in the most unlikely places. 10 days after Thanksgiving, I consulted with Mr. Julian Thorne, my financial advisor. I explained the situation with clinical detachment, as if discussing someone else's family drama. "This happens more often than you'd think, Chloe," he said, leaning back in his chair, his expression empathetic. "Suddenly, wealthy clients frequently face family members emerging with hands outstretched. It's why I generally advise financial privacy." "Too late for that," I said ruefully, a wry smile touching my lips. "Indeed, moving forward, we should review your estate planning and security measures. Not that I expect anything drastic, but information is now out there that wasn't before." We spent 2 hours restructuring certain investments, securing accounts with additional verification measures, and reviewing my will, which had previously left significant portions to Emily and Leo in trust. I didn't remove them entirely, but I reduced the amounts and added conditions regarding education and arts and history pursuits, a quiet hope that they might choose a path of passion, not just prestige. "Are you concerned about potential legal challenges from your sister, the lawyer?" Mr. Thorne asked carefully, his tone professional but concerned. "There's no legal claim she could make, is there?" I asked, my brow furrowed. "Your money is unquestionably yours, earned through legitimate business," he assured me. "But that doesn't always prevent expensive nuisance suits designed to force settlements." I left his office with a renewed appreciation for the legal protections I'd established years ago. The LLC that owned my building, the business structure that shielded personal assets, the careful documentation of major transactions. What had once seemed like excessive precaution now felt like essential foresight. As Christmas approached, the question of holiday plans loomed large. For the first time in my adult life, I would not be attending my parents' traditional Christmas Eve dinner or their Christmas morning brunch. The realization brought both grief and relief. Grief for the family connection I had always hoped might improve. Relief from the performance those gatherings had always required. One snowy evening in mid-December, sorting through a new acquisition of vintage holiday postcards, I found myself staring at idealized images of family gatherings from the early 1900s. Smiling faces around fireplaces, perfectly decorated trees, the fantasy of familial harmony that has persisted through centuries. The gap between those images and my reality struck me with unexpected force. I closed the shop early and walked to Dr. Anya Sharma's office through the gently falling snow. Dr. Sharma had been seeing me monthly for the past 2 years, initially to help process the loneliness that sometimes accompanied my chosen isolation, later evolving into deeper work on family dynamics and self-worth. "You've been preparing for this confrontation for years, Chloe," she observed after I recounted the Thanksgiving events, her voice calm and insightful. "On some level, you always knew this moment would come." "I thought I'd feel more victorious," I admitted, finally showing her the raw vulnerability beneath my calm exterior. Finally showing them I wasn't the failure they thought. Instead, I just feel sad. "You're grieving," she said simply, her gaze kind. "Not just the family you've stepped away from, but the family you always wished they could be." We spent the session exploring the concept of family as I had experienced it versus how I might define it moving forward. Dr. Sharma suggested an exercise, creating a list of people who had actually provided the support, validation, and unconditional positive regard that families ideally offer. The list I compiled over the following week surprised me with its length and depth. Ms. Eleanor Vance from the Historical Society, who had first nurtured my interest in antiques. Professor Liam Maxwell, who had mentored me through college and seen my unique abilities. Sophie, who owned the bakery next to my shop and saved day-old pastries for me just because. Mr. Julian Thorne, who had guided my financial decisions without judgment, treating my unconventional path with respect. even regular customers who had shown more interest in my knowledge and passion than my family ever had. Family of choice, Dr. Sharma called this network when I shared the list. Just as valid as family of origin, often healthier. As Christmas week arrived, I made a decision. Instead of spending the holiday alone, nursing resentment and loss, I would create a new tradition. I sent invitations to my family of choice for Christmas Eve dinner at my apartment. Nothing elaborate, just good food, good wine, and genuine company. The weekend before Christmas, I received an unexpected email from my father, Arthur. It was the first direct communication since Thanksgiving. Chloe, your mother and I have been thinking about recent events. While we don't agree with all your choices, we recognize that communication broke down on all sides. Valerie remains upset, but your mother misses you terribly. Would you consider meeting for coffee, just the three of us, after the holidays? The message contained no apology, no acknowledgement of their role in what had transpired, but also no renewed demands or accusations. It was perhaps as close to conciliation as my father could manage. I replied that I would consider it after the new year, making no promises. It was a tentative step, a small crack in the wall. On December 23rd, I closed the shop early to prepare for my Christmas Eve gathering. As I walked home through a light snow, I passed a small community art center where I had occasionally taken classes years ago. A sign advertised their youth scholarship program for underserved children interested in art history and preservation. Without hesitation, I walked in and made an anonymous donation of 50 ken. It was the same program that had once provided me free summer workshops when my parents had refused to fund what they considered a useless interest. It felt like a full circle, a quiet, powerful act of giving back to the very passion they had so easily dismissed. Christmas Eve arrived, clear and cold, stars visible between Savannah's historic buildings. My guests, Sophie from the bakery, Professor Maxwell and his husband, 2 fellow shop owners from the district, and Mr. Thorne with his daughter, filled my apartment with conversation and laughter that felt genuinely warm rather than performative. We ate well, exchanged modest, thoughtful gifts, and shared stories that celebrated rather than diminished each other's passions. As the evening wound down, I found myself by the window, watching snow begin to fall again on the street below. Professor Maxwell joined me, his voice gentle. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about authenticity," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. "How rare and valuable it is, like the best antiques. You can't fake it convincingly." He nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. The irony being that what your family covets, the money, came precisely from your authentic self, the part they never valued. "There's a metaphor in there somewhere, Chloe." "Indeed," I murmured. He touched my shoulder lightly. "For what it's worth, I've always thought you were extraordinary. Not for what you accumulated, but for how you see the world. That eye for overlooked value. The respect for history's quieter stories. The money is just a byproduct." His words, so different from anything my family had ever offered, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them away, focusing on the snow transforming Savannah into something softer, quieter, new. That night, after everyone had gone, I placed a small wrapped package under my modest tree, vintage first editions of favorite childhood books for Emily and Leo, inscribed with a simple message. "The value of things isn't always visible at first glance. Love, Aunt Chloe." I would mail them after the holidays. A door left slightly open, not for their parents, but for them. As I prepared for bed, I realized I hadn't checked my phone all evening. No anxious monitoring for family messages. No dread of holiday guilt trips. The absence of that anxiety was perhaps the most valuable gift I had received that Christmas. The beginning of freedom from expectations I could never meet, and approval I would never earn. 6 months after Thanksgiving, many things remained unresolved with my family, but within myself, something fundamental had shifted. A recognition that my worth had never been dependent on their assessment, and my future need not be constrained by their narrow imagination. Spring in Savannah brings a particular quality of light, clear and strengthening, illuminating the city's historic architecture with renewed clarity after winter's diffuse gray. 6 months after the Thanksgiving confrontation, I found myself in a similar state of increased clarity, both professionally and personally. The antique shop had undergone subtle transformations. For years, I had operated as a solo enterprise, partly from preference for solitude, partly from the practical advantage of keeping my unique methods private. But in February, I hired my first employee, Grace, a recent art history graduate from SCAD with specialized knowledge of textile preservation and an enthusiasm that reminded me so much of my younger self. "I can't believe I get to handle these pieces every day," she said one afternoon, carefully cataloging a collection of 18th century embroidered samplers. "My family thinks I'm crazy for taking this job instead of something corporate." "Mine too," I replied, the simple acknowledgement creating an unexpected bond between us. With Grace handling more of the day-to-day operations, I found time to pursue a project I'd been contemplating for years, creating detailed educational materials about antique authentication and valuation. What began as internal documentation evolved into workshops for serious collectors, and eventually an online course that attracted unexpected interest from around the country. It was a way to share my knowledge, to connect with others who truly valued it, and to continue building something meaningful. My relationship with my family remained complicated, a delicate dance on uncertain ground. The coffee meeting with my parents in January had been awkward, but not hostile. Three people carefully navigating a minefield of unresolved hurts and divergent perspectives. My father, ever practical, seemed most concerned with establishing that I wouldn't be cutting them off entirely. "We're still family, Chloe," he said as we prepared to leave the cafe, his voice a little gruff. "Disagreements happen in every family." "This was more than a disagreement, Dad," I replied quietly, looking him straight in the eye. "It was a revelation about how you see me." He had no response to that, no argument. But when he hugged me goodbye, it felt less perfunctory than usual, a tiny shift in the years of emotional distance. My mother maintained contact through weekly text messages, updates about neighbors, questions about my health, carefully avoiding any mention of Valerie or money. I responded with equal caution, sharing innocuous details about Savannah weather and new acquisitions at the shop. It wasn't deep connection, not yet, but it was something. A tentative bridge being reconstructed from both sides, a cautious inching forward. Valerie remained another matter entirely. After several attempts to reopen the investment opportunity discussion in January, she had shifted to a strategy of complete silence toward me. Through my mother, I learned that she and Brandon had purchased the larger house they wanted without my assistance, stretching their finances considerably in the process. Emily and Leo still received birthday and holiday gifts from me, acknowledged by brief thank you notes clearly written under parental supervision. I hoped those books were being read. In April, I received a surprising call from my father. He asked if he could visit the shop alone, without my mother or Valerie. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, appearing somewhat out of place among the antiques in his golf shirt and khakis. "I've never really looked at this place," he admitted, studying a Queen Anne secretary desk I had recently acquired, his gaze surprisingly thoughtful. "It's more impressive than I imagined." I gave him a tour, explaining the stories behind select pieces. The Georgian silver service that had belonged to a prominent Savannah merchant family, the Civil War-era letters written by a nurse at Gettysburg, the early American portraiture by a female artist who had signed with only her initials to disguise her gender in a male-dominated world. I watched his face as I spoke, seeing a flicker of something new in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps even a grudging admiration. "You really do know your stuff, Chloe," he said, the surprise in his voice both gratifying and paradoxically painful. It was hard to hear him acknowledge it now, after so many years. "I always thought you were just playing at this," he confessed, running his hand along a Chippendale chair rail, uncharacteristically thoughtful. "I know, your mother and I, we wanted security for you. We pushed Valerie toward law because it seemed safe. We worried when you chose this path. And now that you know it worked out financially, it's suddenly valid?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "That's not fair," he started, then stopped himself. He sighed, a heavy sound. "Actually, maybe it is fair. I should have trusted your judgment more, seen what you were building here." It wasn't quite an apology, not directly, but from my father, it was significant. Perhaps the closest acknowledgement I would ever receive that their assessment had been wrong. "Valerie is struggling," he added after a moment, his voice lower, almost a whisper. "The new house, private school tuition increases. Some investment that didn't pan out. She'd never admit it, but they're overextended. I recognized the implicit question, the unspoken plea. "I'm not bailing them out, Dad," I said, my voice firm. He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Wouldn't expect you to, just thought you should know." After he left, I sat at my desk, considering our conversation. My father's limited recognition of my accomplishments felt like a small victory, a tiny step. But his update about Valerie suggested the fundamental family dynamics remained unchanged. Success measured in possessions, worth determined by appearance, and financial decisions still driven by status rather than substance. In May, I launched a new initiative that gave me unexpected satisfaction: a scholarship for young entrepreneurs interested in historical preservation and antique businesses. The program would provide both funding and mentorship to individuals demonstrating passion and knowledge in these fields. I structured it through a foundation to maintain my privacy, but the work of reviewing applications and meeting candidates connected me with a community of like-minded individuals who valued what I valued, who understood the magic of hidden history. The first recipient was a 23-year-old woman from rural Georgia who had been running a small restoration business from her grandfather's barn. Her knowledge of early American furniture and dedication to preserving traditional craftsmanship techniques impressed the entire selection committee. "I can't believe someone is actually supporting this work," she told me when I called with the news, her voice trembling with excitement. "Everyone keeps telling me to get a real job instead." I smiled at the familiar refrain. "Trust me," I told her, "this is as real as jobs get." Summer brought an unexpected development. My cousin Brooke, who had reached out after Thanksgiving, announced she was relocating to Savannah for a new position teaching environmental science at Georgia Tech. Over dinner at a cozy North End restaurant, we discovered a surprising affinity. Both of us had chosen paths our extended family didn't quite understand. Both valued knowledge over appearance, and both had learned to create boundaries with relatives who recognized only conventional metrics of success. Valerie was always the same at family reunions, Brooke recalled, shaking her head. Everything a competition, everything about status. I stopped attending because I got tired of hearing about her house, her car, her children's exclusive summer camps. "Some things never change," I agreed, a wistful note in my voice. "But some things do, Chloe," Brooke countered, her gaze steady and kind. "Look at you now. Not just financially successful, but doing meaningful work on your terms. That's the real victory." Her words resonated deeply, echoing what Professor Maxwell had said months earlier. As summer transitioned to fall, I found myself approaching the anniversary of the Thanksgiving revelation with unexpected equanimity. The acute pain had subsided, replaced by occasional melancholy. For what might have been, but mostly acceptance of what was. I had learned to value the authentic connections in my life more deeply, with colleagues like Grace who respected my knowledge, clients who appreciated my expertise, and the small but genuine circle of friends who had known me before and after my financial status was revealed, treating me identically regardless. In September, I received a text message from my mother. "Valerie and Brandon are separating. Please don't mention I told you." I felt a complex mixture of sympathy and vindication, compassion for the pain their family was experiencing, combined with the uncomfortable recognition that the lifestyle they had prioritized, the relentless pursuit of status, had perhaps contributed to their instability. I sent a brief, neutral message to Valerie, expressing concern for her and the children. Her response, the first direct communication in months, was surprisingly vulnerable. "Everything's a mess. Kids are struggling. Not how I planned my life to go." 2 days later, I sent a package to her home, not money, which would have reinforced the dynamic I had fought so hard to change, but 2 carefully chosen books on resilience for the children and a simple note: "Sometimes the most valuable things emerge from unexpected change. I'm here if you need me." She didn't acknowledge the gift directly, but my mother reported that the books remained on Emily and Leo's bedside tables. As November approached, bringing the inevitable question of Thanksgiving plans, I made a decision that felt both challenging and right. I invited my parents to Savannah for the holiday. Neutral territory, just the 3 of us. To my surprise, they accepted. On the morning of Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that had changed everything, I stood in my kitchen, preparing a modest but special meal. The doorbell rang promptly at noon. My parents, punctual as always, bore a bouquet of fall flowers and a palpable nervousness that matched my own. "Your apartment is lovely, Chloe," my mother said, looking around with genuine interest rather than the critical evaluation I was accustomed to. "Those windows are spectacular." "Original to the building," I replied, a small smile. "1850s glass." My father nodded appreciatively. "Good investment, property like this in the historic district." Some things, I realized, change slowly, if at all. The meal wasn't perfect. Conversations occasionally stalled or veered too close to sensitive topics. My mother still mentioned Valerie's accomplishments too frequently, though she caught herself more than once. My father still struggled to show interest in my work beyond its financial success, but we were trying. All of us trying to see each other more clearly, to listen more, genuinely. It wasn't the family I dreamed of, but it was a fragile, hopeful start to something new, something more honest. After they left, promising to visit the shop the next day, I stood at my window, watching evening descend on the historic street below. The past year had taught me that wealth took many forms. Financial security, yes, but also self-knowledge, authentic passion, and the courage to be valued on your own terms. I had lost the illusion of unconditional family support, but gained a clearer understanding of my own worth. The antique dealer in me recognized the irony. Sometimes the most valuable things are those initially dismissed, hidden in plain sight, their true worth apparent only to those with the knowledge to see beyond surface appearances. Like the Revolutionary War document found in a box of old papers, or the masterpiece painting leaning against a water heater, my passion and expertise had been overlooked, even scorned, until they produced tangible results the world recognized as valuable. But I had always known their worth, and in that knowledge lay the true fortune I had built, one that could never be demanded, divided, or diminished. If my story resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had family members undervalue your choices until they prove successful? How did you handle it? What boundaries have you created to protect your peace? Hit like and subscribe if you appreciate authentic stories about family dynamics and self-worth. Share with someone who might need to hear that their path matters, even when others don't see its value. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to value yourself, regardless of others' opinions.